Hey, good morning, man. August is here, is it not? Oh my God, you walk outside and your clothes just stick to you right away, you know? But that's all right, because we're in here, we're in the air conditioner, and I came in yesterday and I cranked the air conditioner down because I was not going to be hot in here today. There was no way I was going to do that. But, you know, we kicked off this awesome series last week. And unfortunately, this week I don't have any wrestling videos for you. I know you're a little sad about that. But, man, I am so excited about this series. I don't know, I might start styling and profiling up here on stage today. Come on, Danny, give it to me. There you go. Yeah. If I could do that, I would. But I'm excited about this series and what we're talking about in this series, Stand Up. So we started off last week and we talked about this new season that I really feel God is telling us that we're getting ready to go into as a group, as a church, as individuals. And if you weren't here, I can catch you up real quick on those things we talked about. We talked about those things that are going to bring you across are going to be, first of all, is going to be you. You are going to be the biggest factor in this church moving into its new season. You know, by you going out and telling your story and you going out and drawing people in. You know, no amount of social media posts or things we put out or mailers we do are going to make the difference like it is going to be when you tell your story. And then we heard Pastor Perry talk about small groups. Small groups are awesome. And yesterday and last week, we had some awesome men's group. And man, just invest in that. And I'm looking forward to those growing and getting quite a few men here as we continue those small groups, the women start. But you investing in yourself and in your own growth are going to be a big factor in that as well, too. And the third thing I mentioned last week is this series. This series is going to be an important part. And this series isn't just going to end at the end of the series, but we're going to continue to look at this and take this and look at what we learned throughout this series and carry this on with us as individuals and as a church, as Ignite. So we're going to continue this conversation that we started last week. And that's really what this series is. It's just a longer conversation about how do we move to that season. Over the last month or so, I've spoke a lot about God standing on the other side of the door. And whether you attend here regularly or whether you watch online regularly or whether you just ran across us accidentally, I think so many times God is on the other side of that door waiting for you to move to that next step. And we think we're waiting on God, we're waiting on a sign, we're waiting on something, but that's often not the case. See, God wants us to go out and tell our story. God wants us to move to that next thing that we need to do. And it's not a have to do, and we talked about that last week, and I'm going to bring that up a lot this week. It's not something you got to do, it's something you get to do. It's not a got to, it's a get to. And we get to remember, man, telling our story, that's not a got to. We get to go out and tell our story. But sometimes we don't do that, and one of those reasons why is we feel inadequate. We feel inadequate in ourselves. We feel inadequate of who we are because of what this world is kind of make us. We're intimidated to tell our story. And that's what I want to start off with today is talk about some of those reasons why we are intimidated to go out and tell our story to other people. See, there's this idea when we feel that we're somewhat defined by what other people have said or these qualifications that we have that we've given to ourselves. And really that's not the case. And so we go through life feeling that there's a failure upon us, that we don't have a story to tell or that we're not able to tell our story or there's some reasons why. So I thought of some of those reasons, and that's kind of what we're going to spend today talking about as we talk about that feeling of inadequacy, that feeling that we have that we can't go out and tell our story. So one of those reasons, the first reason I have in there is you might think that you don't know enough. You know, this is common fear that a lot of people have. You know, what if I can't answer all those questions that somebody has about the Bible? What if I don't know all the answers? And I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret. You know, I don't know all the answers either. I don't. But here's what I do know. I was saved by grace through Jesus Christ, who came to this earth, lived a perfect life, set the example for me, and that's enough to begin to tell my story. That's enough to begin to talk about it. That's all you really need to know. See, I don't want you to think less of me because I actually haven't been to Bible school. I mean, unless you consider vacation Bible school. And if that's Bible school, you know, I'm like a 6-year candidate for it. You know, I don't even want a bike for bringing the most people to vacation Bible school one time. And then my mom made me give it to an orphanage. So, but really she did. I didn't get to keep it. But you know, I haven't been to Bible school. I learn these stories as I'm going along and learning. But what I did learn, what I knew was a part of my life is just because I haven't been to Bible school, it's not going to stop me from talking about Jesus. That's not going to stop me about sharing the story about how Jesus changed everything in my life. He can change everything in yours too. Here's what happened to me. It doesn't matter. There's a couple of people this week that I'll share with you. I know some of you heard the story already, but, they decided to go out and tell their story. And I know both of them, they haven't been to Bible scholar school and graduated from seminary and done internships and all that, but they just went to the laundromat this week. And they were telling their story. Danny and Erica went out and they started talking to some of the people in there. They paid for some of their laundry. They were folding clothes. And that's what we got to do. We got to quit getting caught up with the fact that we may not know everything in the Bible. We may not know every answer. And we may not know these things that are going to come up. But just understand that really all we got to do is share our story. And if people have questions along the way, we can help them figure out what those are. That kind of brings me to my next point of things that we think about. We think that, we might not know enough. And the second thing we think a lot is that I'm just not good enough. That I'm not good enough of a person to share Jesus with other people. Man, I'm going to let you in on something. I guess today is Confessions of Pastor Mike Day, because I just told you I didn't go to Bible school. I'm going to tell you this. I let Jesus down every day. It breaks my heart that I do that. It's not my intention to do that. But I do something that makes me not good enough every day. But I'll give you this piece of advice. If you wait until you are good enough, if you wait until you are perfect enough to share Jesus with somebody, you ain't never going to share Jesus with anybody. There's that old saying that says, you shouldn't talk about two things, politics and religion. And I disagree with that slightly. I think that religion is okay to talk about, especially have a calm conversation about. Just make sure you're not going to get so stuck in your ways that you have two religions that are so very similar and there's a little thing and you get frustrated in an argument about it. So I think religion's okay to talk about, have conversations about, ask people questions about theirs and share things about yours. But I'd say the two things you don't talk about are religion and parenting. That's what I feel. Because parenting, man, it's a personal thing. It really is. And so, I try my best not to tell people how to parent, Now, I get it. There's times that you might have an opinion that's correct. I mean, there's kids that are in really bad situations or in houses that there's meth or abuse physically or emotionally or whatever. That's fine to maybe interject. But I'm just talking about general, normal houses parenting. You see, because the way I parent's perfect, obviously, because I had 3 perfect kids, if y'all met them. They're absolutely perfect. So obviously I know how to do it. I know how to do it right. But I'm going to stay out of your business. But there is a piece of advice that I do give people about parenting. Either people that are thinking about having a kid or somebody who just found out they were going to have a kid and maybe you're nervous. And I think I've probably said this to a few of you people that are here today. But the thing I've always said was if you wait to have a kid until you have enough money and finances and resources to have a kid, you're never going to experience the joys of parenting. You're never ready for it. But somehow when it happens, God prepares you and He gets you ready and He helps you and He makes sure that you can buy formula and diapers and all those things. And it works out, doesn't it? I mean, I think most of us have probably been in a situation where we were like, I don't know how that happened. And now I got to figure, there's no way I can have enough. I can't afford these kids. How can I have more kids? But it happens and it's okay. And I think it's the same idea and concept when we're talking about sharing your story with other people. We may not feel good enough, but if we wait to a point to where we are good enough, we're never going to share that story because we're never going to be perfect. We're always going to screw up. We're always going to have sin within our life. And our goal should be to do our best to not continue to repeat those things, to live a life that glorifies God and Jesus Christ. But we can't wait until we're perfect to share our story. So you might feel like you don't know enough, or you might feel inadequate because you're not good enough. And that third thing I was thinking of is you might feel like a failure and you're unable to share your story because you've made too many mistakes. You look at your past and you see what other people think about you or saw you, and you imagine, I don't know how God could ever use me because, man, I've screwed up pretty big in my life, and I can really relate to this one. I mean, you might be listening to this and thinking, well, you don't know what I've done. You don't know the mistakes I've made. You don't know how I've screwed up in my past. But I'll tell you this. This is all of these ideas. If you think about these, you're not good enough. You're inadequate. You don't know enough. You've screwed up enough. This isn't God telling you this. This is Satan. See, Satan's okay with you not telling your story. I mean, he's okay with you showing up here Sunday morning. He ain't got no problem with that. He knows you've already made up your mind. There's Jesus. You're going to follow him. Da-da-da. There ain't nothing I can do about it. That's cool. But what he doesn't want is you to go tell anybody else about it. So when you have those feelings of, I'm inadequate, I can't do this, I don't know enough, I've screwed up too much, that's Satan sitting there saying, man, you can't go tell your story because people are going to judge you and they're going to feel you're a hypocrite. I know this. This is exactly where I was. Whenever I first started following Jesus, I had this idea in my head that well, I'm a man of my word. I'm a man of honor. And I don't want to go tell these people that I've gone and found Jesus and this life change has happened to me because I'm concerned that they might think, I mean, not that I was embarrassed about it, but like they knew what I did. I was with them when we did that thing. I ain't going to tell you what the thing is, but, I was running around with these people. I listened to that music. I made fun of women. I told them dirty jokes. I was crude and rude, and I did not live a life that glorifies God. And if here I come up and say, hey, guess what? I'm following Jesus now, and here's what I found, and Jesus can change it. They're going to be like, man, I know. Whatever, I know. And this story kind of came to my head whenever I was struggling with some of this in the very beginning of as I was following Jesus. And I decided what I'm going to do, so I'm not a hypocrite with my words, is I'm just going to start to live for Jesus, and they're going to see what I do, and they're going to understand. But that doesn't really work out either. I mean, you can't just do it with only your actions, but your actions and your words have to line up with people. And so as I'm struggling with this in life and going through it, I was reminded of this story in my past that happened to me. I'll share it with you real quick. But there's this guy, his name, I call him Pastor Howie. Most of you guys might know Pastor Howie. You might not know him as Pastor Howie. You might know him as Howie of Howie and Bubba fame, Howie of Howie on the radio, Howie of Howie on Good Morning Four States, whatever it is. But Howie and I have been good friends for a lot of years, quite a few years. I actually asked him if I could share a little bit of his story, because I don't like to talk about people on stage and use their name. And he was like, cool, man, go at it. So I know that he wouldn't care how much I shared. He's very adamant about sharing his story. But see, Howie has been in some really bad places in his life. Sometimes I was in those bad places with Howie, We got to some of those bad places together. And a lot of times, he went on his own path and he had some bad things. But we grew up kind of following this same path. We actually were in the same circle for a lot of years, hung out with the same people, did the same bad things. And interestingly enough, we're again back in the same circle with each other and, kind of fun story with that. But man, Howie did some bad things. I knew about some of them. Some of them I knew because I'd see him every once in a while and we'd talk about it. And some of them I knew because I saw him on TV one day, and well, he wasn't on TV being Howie and Bubba. He was on TV with his mugshot, But I won't share that. He wouldn't care, and again, he'll share that story, I'm sure, if you ever want to hear it. He's got an awesome testimony about what he's been through and the path he's gone. But anyway, so I hadn't seen him for a little while, and I run into him one day at work. And he walks up to me, and I said, hey, Howie, what's going on? And he says, just like this, I swear, just like, I found Jesus. It like starts falling down. And I'm like, whoa, brother, what's going on? This is before I'm following Jesus at all. And I'm like, what? We talked about those weird evangelical testify. It was one of those situations for me as somebody who wasn't following Jesus at the time. And he just goes into telling me about how he found Jesus and he made it to this place. And he actually started off working a lot with the Lazarus house and working with people that were in the same situation that he was in and were coming out of that. And then he started that Impact Life Church. And so he took this idea of I'm not good enough, I've made too many mistakes, I've screwed up too much. And he said, this is who I have to minister to. And so as I'm struggling with the same thing, as I'm struggling with this in my life, God just puts that into my head. And he's like, man, remember that time. Remember that? Did you think less of Howie? Did you think he was a hypocrite? Did you think he was a horrible person because you knew what he was doing, but yet I came into his life and changed him? And I'm like, no. And that's the exact same story that began to get me on a path of saying, you know what? I'm not a hypocrite if I tell my story. I'm not a hypocrite if I go out there and say that. So it doesn't matter what you've done, but many times these mistakes and these problems that you've had can be what helps mold you into deciding where you need to go and where you have passion about, because God has brought you out of something. God has brought you through something, whatever it is, whatever situation it is. Some people, it could be that you've been kicked out of church because of, you didn't line up with their religion, or, your story is different. Everybody's story is different, but everybody's story is important and meaningful. Not all of us have the story of being down in a ditch and the hobos would even kick us when they walked by. We don't have this dramatic story of life change, but we've all been in a place without God. We all know what that's like, and we all have a story that we can tell somebody. And the point of us telling our story is just to tell people, man, I was just like you. I was just like you were. But then God extended me grace, not because I worked at it, not because I deserve it, not because I did anything, but that grace was extended to me. So through time, I've really figured out that these things don't make us a failure and unable or inadequate to tell our story. The fact that we might not know enough, or that we're not good enough, or that we've made too many mistakes. But all these things don't prohibit us from that, but they actually make us perfect candidates for the people to go out and share their story. See, you're a candidate for God using to share your story if you have messed up big. If you've messed up big, if you've lived a life that wasn't glorifying God before, if you've lived a life of the world, you're a perfect candidate for going out and sharing your story. If we look at Isaiah, he was in that same situation. As we look at Isaiah 6:5, he says, "Woe to me," I cried. "Man, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips." I did all these things wrong, man. I messed up big. I made a lot of mistakes. But not only did I make a lot of mistakes, man, all the people I ran around with. I live among people of unclean lips. All my friends, man, they aren't worthy, and everybody knows this. There are so many heroes in the Bible that messed up big. There's so many of them throughout there. But God was able to use them in spite of how bad they messed up. And he can use you in spite of how bad you've messed up in your past too. Whenever God uses us, in spite of that, it shows that his perfect love is there for every one of us, and he can change each one of us. I mean, Moses murdered a man, right? Moses went out, he killed somebody, he killed an Egyptian when the Egyptian and the Hebrew were fighting with each other. And then he tried to, hide that, and then another Egyptian found out, he took off running. So Moses, he messed up big, but God was still able to use him. Abraham was a liar. Abraham lied about Sarah, his wife, because he was concerned with his own safety. They were going to the town. They were afraid that the guys would be like, "Ooh, she's smoking hot." And what they'd do if they liked this girl is they'd go kill the husband. And, "Hey, look at that. She's single all of a sudden." So he was in fear of his own life. So he lied, and he's like, "Oh, no. That's my sister, man. That ain't my wife. That's my sister." See, Abraham was a liar, but God was still able to use him in spite of that. Jacob was a cheater. We talked about Jacob a few weeks ago. Remember Jacob and Red, Esau? What happened with Jacob? He went and he stole the blessing from his father, stole it from Esau. Rahab was a prostitute. God was able to use her. David committed adultery. If we remember David, he saw Bathsheba over there and he was like, "Hey man, look at her, I gotta have her." And then he's like, "Oops, she's pregnant, what do I do now?" And not only did he commit adultery, but he also went ahead and tried to kill her husband because he's like, "I don't know what to do. Maybe I can get him to come home. Maybe we can trick him. Oh, he won't come home? Well, let's get him to die." So David, man, he messed up big. And then we know Paul murdered Christians. Man, Paul, this guy that was so influential in planting these churches and spreading the gospel of Jesus, went around and killed people that were Christians. And God was able to use all of these people because they made perfect candidates for God to use because they had messed up big. And you would know if somebody can mess up big and God still use them, there's got to be some divine intervention within there. And so the fact that you've messed up has nothing to do with your ability to be used by God. I consider myself in this same boat. I've messed up big in my life. I've had a lot of mistakes that I've made along the way. I had a lot of mistakes that I knew before I knew any of you guys. But I think those mistakes that I made, the fact that I feel like I was one of the least candidates for God to use, has helped inspire me to be able to use that to go out. If we look at what Isaiah said right after that in 6:8, he says, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send?'" Remember, Isaiah was just saying, I'm a bad dude and I hang out with bad dudes. And then the Lord says, "Hey man, who am I supposed to send?" And what does Isaiah say to him? He says, "Here I am, send me." So in spite of how much we've messed up, I love those two words, send me. Send me. In spite of how much I've messed up, man, I know I let you down, Lord. I know I did, but I thank you for saving me. I thank you. Send me, man. Send me to tell my story. Send me to tell those people. Send me to go out there and realize that it doesn't matter how much I've messed up. Because the fact that I did mess up, because of the fact that I'm just like you, that makes me a perfect candidate. That makes you a perfect candidate to share your story. The other thing that makes you a perfect candidate to share your story is if you're unsure of yourself. In Exodus 4:10, we see Moses is pretty unsure of himself. Another one of those heroes of the Bible we talked about. Not only did he murder a man, but he says to the Lord, he's like, "Lord, man, I can't do this. I can't go out and talk to these people. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past or since you have spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue." See, what Moses is saying is he's like, "God, I know you want me to go out and talk, but I can't go out and talk. I'm not good at speaking in front of other people." And here's the thing I find really interesting about Moses' life. God had his hand on Moses from the very beginning. So you'd think that God would have equipped Moses with the ability to speak in front of other people. Let's go through the story real quick. So what happened? All the Hebrew boys are being killed. Moses' mom takes them, puts them in a basket. We all learned this in Sunday school. He's out in the reeds. And then Pharaoh's daughter is out there. Pharaoh, the highest dude in Egypt, the baddest dude, his daughter's out there. She finds him in the weeds. She picks him up. All of a sudden, this is going to be her boy. Now, this Hebrew boy is going to be killed. God had his eyes on Moses at that point. Then what gets to happen? His real mom gets to raise him as she works for Pharaoh's daughter. And so not only does Moses get to not be killed, but he still gets to be raised by his mom. God had his hands on Moses the whole time. He had a plan for him. He knew that he was going to do something incredible. Moses grows up in the Egyptian army or in the Egyptian kingdom as a Hebrew, knowing he's a Hebrew because his mom got to have those stories with him as he grew up. So God had his hand on him the whole time. And he takes over the army and he's watching over this whole land. So God had his hand on him. But you'd think that if God had his hand on him the whole time, why wouldn't he have gone ahead and made him, eloquent in speaking or whatever? Because, I've said this a lot here, and it almost becomes cliche-ish, but I really wanted to say it because understanding this and understanding your story is a big piece, but God doesn't call those equipped, he equips the called. And that was the same thing it was with Moses, was you would think that through this whole process of Moses growing up, God would have equipped him. But had he equipped him, then how do we know that it's Moses talking and not God talking? Because God wanted Moses to understand what his calling was, and he wanted him to know, hey man, because you can't talk, that makes it all the better. I'll take care of it. I'm going to equip you for what I've called you to do. God is going to equip you to tell your story so you can go out there and be able to do it. If we look at Exodus 4:11, that's where God comes to Moses and he says to him, he's like, man, who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute or gives him sight or makes him blind? Isn't it I, the Lord? Now go out and I will help you speak and I will teach you what to say. And God's saying to him, you know what? You are the perfect candidate. You are the perfect, because when you go out there and you speak eloquently, when you go to Pharaoh and you have conversations with him, when you are taking care of this, whenever you are doing things outside of what you are equipped to do, people are going to know that I am in control. So you're that perfect candidate to use if you've messed up, if you're unsure of yourself, And the third one is if others think that you're not. If you look at Samuel 16:7, it says the Lord does not look at the things that the man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. When you start to tell your story, when you start to go out there, there's going to be a lot of opposition. I can promise you that. There's going to be people that are going to get in your way. And the more that happens, the more that you should realize that you're doing something that you should. And I shared some of my story with the guys at group last week about whenever I was called into ministry or whatever. But one thing I didn't share with them was there was a lot of opposition as I started having that conversation with people. And interestingly enough, most of the opposition that I got came from other Christians. And honestly, what they were telling me were, you're not good enough. You don't live a perfect enough life. They would say things like, you don't know enough. You haven't been to Bible school. You haven't been to seminary. You haven't learned all the books. You know, a lot of the opposition I got, even from people from the world, is I know where you were. I knew your mistakes. I know your past. There were a lot of people that gave me opposition. And whenever you start to tell your story, you're going to see that same thing. Because back to what we were saying earlier, who doesn't want you to tell your story? Satan, man. He's going to put things in your path. He's going to do whatever he can to get people to stop you throughout that process. But what you have to do is not let those people define who you are, what you talk about, what story you tell. Because you're not who they say you are. You're not to do what they say you're supposed to do. But you are who Jesus says that you are. It doesn't matter what your education level is. It doesn't matter how much you know. If we look at the book of Acts and we looked at that story that Luke said. We talked about that last week. Luke wrote this book as he was investigating for Theophilus. And here's what Luke figured out. In Acts 4:13 it says, when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men. Who are these heroes in the Bible? Unschooled, ordinary people, just like you, just like me. But what did they do? They were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus, and they felt that was so important. They needed to go out and tell their story and share their story. Man, there are these heroes in the Bible, and we look at them like heroes. And they are. They truly are heroes. But they weren't superheroes, born in some unnatural way on a planet of Krypton. Is that a real place, superhero people? I think that is. Anyway, sorry. I'm not big. Okay, thank you. But, you know, they are just ordinary people. And the best stories in the Bible, almost all of the stories in the Bible is a collection of ordinary people that God used in extraordinary ways. The Lord takes nobodies and he makes them somebody. So you're not what other people think you are. You're not what other people say you are, and your story isn't defined by somebody else. But you're called, you're equipped, you have a purpose, you are loved, you are chosen. You're not inadequate. You're more than enough. Through Jesus Christ, you are more than enough. You are perfectly enough to share your story with somebody else and tell them, Jesus changed everything in my life. And he can change everything in your life too. So I'd say, how do we do that? And we talked about that some last week, but just continuing that conversation, I think the first thing to remember is that your life is the greatest part of that witness. The things that you do physically have to line up with those words that you're a follower of Jesus. You're a representation of Jesus Christ. You're a walking, living, breathing witness for him. And so it's not just about what you say, but it's about how you act, how you talk, the jokes you laugh at work, the people that you congregate with. But I think the other thing that we miss too often as we're trying to share our story, if we think about that piece, and we talked about like people that are testifying on the street corners, or people that are out there being, evangelical in front of masses of people, and maybe, those bad connotations of it. The piece that they miss is that they don't listen. That is such an important part of you telling your story, is listening to somebody else. Because you only earn the right to tell your story when you listen to their story. The best thing that you can do in sharing your story is just to listen to what somebody else has to say. The Bible tells us that Jesus was a friend of sinners. And who better to model our life after than the man that came here and saved me, saved you from hell, and eternity to spend to him in heaven. So you're enough. You're perfectly enough. You're not inadequate. You're not what the world says you are. You're not what your friends say you are. You're not what Satan puts in your mind that you are. But you are perfectly positioned and adequate to tell your story to those people that you run into. Man, think about it. God puts people in your life every day to tell your story to. He puts those people that sit next to you at school that you hear telling those dirty jokes. He puts those people at work that are in miserable financial states, or their relationships are falling apart. He puts people in our path every day, the server at the restaurant, whoever it is. He puts people in our path all the time. We don't share our story because we feel inadequate. But man, I'm telling you, you are perfectly positioned and adequate to share your story with other people and stand up. I pray with you guys as we close out today. Jesus, I love you so much, man. I just thank you today for this message, this conversation, this piece of just reminding every one of us, including myself, that we are completely adequate. We are completely perfect to tell our story to other people. The story that we are thankful to you, Lord, that you came to this earth. You sent your son here, God, to send Jesus here to live a perfect life, to show us that path, to die on the cross. That you've come into our life and changed each one of us. Lord, I thank you for my salvation, but more importantly, Lord, I just ask that you present opportunities for me, present opportunities for each one of us here, and give us the strength and the courage to just stand up and tell somebody our story. Invite them here. Invite them to be a part of this family, Lord. That you give us this courage and this power, and that you just overcome these oppositions that are in our life. That you help us understand that those things and people are parts of the enemy that are on each one of us, telling us, man, your story ain't worth it. It ain't that good. I'm cool if you're going to church, but we don't need to invite anybody else. Lord, and I just ask that you would come in at those moments, and you would just remind us, man, we are good enough. That you have positioned us perfectly in this situation to tell our story. Lord, I thank you for everything that you have done for us and everything that you are going to do. In your glorious name, I pray this. Amen.